Hello, my name is Cole Kittigal, and my industrial organization psychology presentation is on employee absenteeism. My paper is entitled, Where Were You When I Needed You? Employee Absenteeism in the Workplace. There's nothing more frustrating in the workplace when a coworker misses their assigned shift and causes more work and stress for the rest of the employee staff. Employee absenteeism is defined as when an individual, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, decides to miss work. Now, as I just said, employee absenteeism can be separated into two different categories: voluntary absenteeism and involuntary absenteeism. Voluntary absenteeism is defined as when an employee purposely decides to avoid work because they'd rather be spending their time somewhere else and doing something else. For example, this would be you deciding to skip work on Friday to go see the basketball game. Involuntary absenteeism is when a worker has a legitimate excuse for missing work, usually an unexpected illness or family emergency. Regardless of whether it's voluntary or involuntary, worker absenteeism affects the workplace significantly. And, through my first-hand experience, I understand the strain and stress it puts on the rest of the staff to perform. Since the end of my spring quarter my freshman year in 2016, I've had the pleasure of working at Abercrombie & Fitch in my hometown of Palo Alto as a stock and sales associate. It's a position that helps me make ends meet and has greatly improved my customer service skills, and it has allowed me to make strong connections with my coworkers and managers. Now, even though employees came and went, the working atmosphere was always fun, but professional, and through a lot of help and training, I became pretty competent at my job. The most infuriating part of my job, though, was from my experience at Abercrombie & Fitch, is when a coworker misses their appointed shift and does not notify the managers of their reasoning of their absence. This always causes the managers to get frustrated, and on the rare occasion, take out their anger on the staff by becoming stricter and more likely to snap if a coworker made a mistake. But the worst part would be that everyone's workload would be increased significantly, as everyone would have to cover for the missing employee. One instance in particular comes to the forefront of my memory as absolutely the worst shift I've had in a while. It was during the holiday season, and it was Christmas Eve, which is undoubtedly one of the biggest and busiest days for our store. We had 4 employees not show up for their shift, and it resulted in pandemonium as our ill-equipped and understaffed workforce dealt with numerous shoplifters, mammoth piles of clothes stacked against the walls and in the dressing rooms, and many angry customers. The roughest shift in my young working career resulted in one of our managers quitting the next week, and the 4 coworkers who didn't show up receiving harsh citations. This incident greatly frustrated me, but also made me aware of the glaring problem that organizations have with employee absenteeism. Our textbook highlights many research findings and experience regarding worker absenteeism. In particular, one of the more controversial research has been examining the relationship between job satisfaction and employee absenteeism, as many studies have yielded inconsistent outcomes. A meta-analysis of a large amount of studies resulted in an indication that job satisfaction and absenteeism are negative correlated, but the relationship between them is not very strong. This is due to the fact that there are recurring issues with measuring absenteeism that results with both voluntary and involuntary absenteeism to be combined in most studies, meaning that there could be significant negative correlation between job satisfaction and voluntary absenteeism, but no major relationship between job satisfaction and involuntary absenteeism. Another conflicting argument regards the relationship between worker absenteeism and employee turnover. Some research suggests that there is a positive relationship between the turnover and absenteeism, while other research indicates there is no relationship. After conducting a meta-analysis of several studies, there is indication that a relationship does exist between turnover and absenteeism. However, there is no indication that turnover was more related to voluntary absenteeism over involuntary. And finally, according to our text, individual employee absenteeism can be affected by the company's policy towards absenteeism and a coworker's absence rate, meaning that if an organization has a relaxed policy that is too lenient to absences, or if other coworkers repeatedly miss work, employees will feel more inclined to skip work regardless of job satisfaction. From the Journal of Occupational and Organizational Psychology, the research study that I chose was entitled Employee Absenteeism Measures reflecting current work practices may be instrumental in a reevaluation of the relationship between psychological distress, mental health, and absenteeism. The researchers argued that traditional absenteeism measures do not accurately reflect the contemporary workplace environment anymore. They argue that the usual methods to measure absenteeism in the workplace are outdated. Using an hours-based system to measure absenteeism, they evaluated the effect of psychological distress that has on employee absenteeism. Psychological distress and absenteeism data was collected from 54,264 full-time employees who completed a World Health Organization and work performance questionnaire. Consistent with regular method of measuring absenteeism, the workers were asked to specify how many hours of work they missed. An hours-based absenteeism was calculated from a ratio of how many hours the person worked to how many their employer expected them to work during a week. The usual calculation of absenteeism gave them the result that increased psychological distress is linked with increasing absenteeism. However, using the hours-based ratio method gave the result that psychological distress did not influence absenteeism. Traditional methods to calculate absenteeism may be effective with professions where the worker has to clock in and out of work. However, they do not reflect the current work practice environment where more employees will work overtime to make up for the hours that they missed. The results from their studies indicate that previous studies that focus on health and productivity should reassess the pertinence of the absenteeism measure. Employee absenteeism costs companies huge amounts of money and decreased workplace efficiency every year. While organizations can't stop involuntary absenteeism, as it is inevitable, voluntary absenteeism still can be eliminated. Here are a few of my solutions on how to decrease voluntary absenteeism. As I mentioned earlier, employees are more likely to voluntarily skip work if coworkers are missing work deliberately, and if the company has a lenient policy towards being absent from work. An employee is less likely to leave if the organization's absence policy is strict, and if they know they will be punished if they will be continuously decide to blow off work. If a worker sees their coworker being punished from voluntary absenteeism, they are also less likely to do the same in order to avoid being punished. Successful and efficient communication can have an impact on voluntary absenteeism. Downward communication is when a message flows downward in the company's organizational hierarchy, usually from superiors to subordinates. Upward communication is the flow of messages from lower levels of the organization to the higher levels of the organization. Keeping a balanced flow of upward and downward communication in a company is an effective way to decrease the rates of voluntary absenteeism, as the constant flow of communication will create bonds of trust between the subordinate and the superior, and incentivize the employee to not skip work in order to keep the trust consistent. Finally, implementing an intensive employee screening process may also help affect voluntary absenteeism, as if the company and organization is stricter and more precise on what they want and then what they're looking for in an employee, they can avoid hiring employees that have a history of skipping work. Thank you. This is the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.